Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. A strange, unbearable state, to feel every cell, yet be chained to the spot, to smell scents, to hear sounds, but not to distinguish them, not to understand where they came from, what they meant. In his head was a perfect, terrifying emptiness, as if the world he had lived in had been wiped clean, taking with it everything that had been before. He could not remember himself, nor where he was, nor how or why he had ended up here. He was lying down. Yes, that was the only thing he knew for sure. Everything else, including his own name, thoughts, and feelings, was hidden behind a thick, impenetrable fog. Finally, gathering his last strength, as if preparing for something dangerous, he tried to open his eyes. His eyelids, twitching convulsively, parted slightly, and faint glimmers of light pierced the impenetrable darkness where coloured zigzags danced like nimble dots. They grew, merged, spreading into two shimmering slits, and bright daylight flooded his eyes. At that same instant, a terrible pain pierced his head, making him squeeze his eyes shut in fright, silently begging for the return of the blessed darkness. In the darkness, it turned out, it was so peaceful. Now the pain darted about aimlessly, without rhythm or measure, absolute, omnipresent, unbearable. It was the strongest pain in his life, and he, remembering nothing, somehow knew this with perfect clarity. He moaned dully, plaintively, and a moment later felt a sweat-soaked strand of hair creep upwards on its own. Something cool and soft rested on his forehead. The touch was pleasant, soothing, instantly alleviating the unbearable pain. The hammers, saws, and needles raging in his head began to lose their sharpness, diminish, disappear, retreating under the onslaught of this tenderness. His nostrils, convulsively flared, drew in a light, barely perceptible aroma. In it, notes of something fresh, tart, sparkling, at once long familiar and completely unknown, were wonderfully intertwined. Then a life-giving moisture was felt on his lips, and liquid flowed down his dry, sore throat, bringing blessed relief. This was followed by a quick, light prick in the shoulder, like a mosquito bite. He moaned gratefully, relieved, and heard a voice, thin, like a silver bell, quiet, like the rustle of grass, gentle, like a kitten under a palm. "Well, that's good, very good. Just wonderful that you've woken up," the voice said. "And now you need to rest, sleep. Hush-a-bye, baby." The wonderful sounds of the voice seemed to drift away from him, fading. His last thought was quite childish. Did Mom come back? This effort stunned him with a final volley of pain, and he instantly sank into silence and darkness. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was soft but rhythmic, pressing into his consciousness. He took a long time gathering his strength, remembering with horror how his previous attempt to open his eyes had ended. Finally, tensing up and preparing for a possible blow of pain, he opened one eye slightly. Listening to his sensations and feeling nothing suspicious, he peeled open his eyelids. Now he didn't squeeze them shut, but froze in amazement. A gnome was looking at him with huge blue eyes, without blinking, a real gnome. Short, half a man's height, with a long grey beard, thick hanging eyebrows, a large nose, and a huge red cap. Without taking his eyes off him, the amazing creature was lightly tapping the floor with a stick. Noticing his bulging eyes, the gnome tilted his head to the side, tugged at his beard, and giggled. He closed his eyes, hoping the strange vision would dissipate, but it got even worse. Now, instead of one, he saw two gnomes. This one was slightly taller, or maybe the bright blue cap was just bigger. It's clear, he's gone mad, he thought. The illusions were not going to disappear. On the contrary, they began to circle around him, making sounds resembling a very familiar tune. Evidently, attracted by these strange calls, a third gnome joined them, this time in a bright yellow cap. Yes, it's all clear. I've gone crazy, he thought with surprising calmness. He watched the dance of the colourful caps with pleasure. At least I'm going crazy cheerfully, with songs and dances, he decided. And I could have been losing my mind in the company of scary spiders or skeletons, but look at these cuties, and they sing great. What were they singing? Something very familiar, long, long forgotten, although it was impossible to forget it. Oh my God, it's a little fir tree was born in the forest. Of course. He smiled with difficulty, crookedly, and moved his lips, involuntarily repeating the words of the children's song. All right, everybody out of here, quick, he heard a voice. He recognized it immediately, that same soft, silvery whispering timbre that had made him so calm last time. True, now there were angry, ringing notes in it, clearly intended for the mischievous gnomes. In response, there was a chorus of stubborn snuffling. "Jamie, don't you dare come into this room!" The voice came from somewhere to the side, and he couldn't manage to see the speaker. He was still afraid to turn his head, listening to the squabble. "But this is our room. We have our stuff here," one gnome protested. "And I need to get under my bed. Well, I just need to," another echoed. "And did you see the markers?" a third asked. "And I don't want to sleep next to Alex anymore. You know what he does in his sleep? I'll tell you later in your ear." A hubbub arose. "We'll sort it out later. Now link up and form a train out there, through the door. Quick," came the reply. The gnomes obediently grabbed each other's clothes. The one in front, with full responsibility for the mission entrusted to him, dragged the colourful train away. Having seen them off with his eyes, he closed them tiredly. It seemed he needed to somehow learn to distinguish reality from visions, and at the same time come to terms with the fact that fairy tale creatures were calmly bouncing around him, singing songs familiar to any child from early childhood. "How are you doing?" a voice asked above him, and he again felt the thin, slightly tart scent of freshness. "Oh yes, you're doing great. You can look right here at the tip of my finger." The voice was close, and he obediently tried to focus. "Okay, good. Now I'll move. Don't take your eyes off my finger. Good. So, more. Look at the finger. Why can't you?" He really couldn't, but not because his eyes refused to obey, but because he didn't want to take them off the face leaning over him. A fairy? A mermaid? Who was this? What an amazing creature stood so close that he could see a thin bluish vein on her temple. A vein? So she was human? No, it couldn't be. There were no such creatures among humans. Humans, they were rougher, denser, wider, heavier, louder. They were covered in thick skin, covered with hairs. They had bright, fleeting faces, and they were constantly showing their teeth in unnecessary smiles. By the way, she could well have been a representative of any of the listed fairy tale races, since she had just shooed away a whole crowd of gnomes. So why shouldn't she herself be a dryad or a sylph? After all, he had already come to terms with being in some strange, frozen world. Her face, as if outlined with delicately drawn calligraphic strokes. High, sharp cheekbones, almost straight eyebrows sweeping towards her temples, a small nose, gently outlined lips, pale, matte, transparent skin. Everything about this face was inexpressibly delicate, elegant, light. It seemed woven from mist, from haze, and if you blew harder, the face would melt, disappear, just as fantastic figures disappear in swirls of clouds. She was not at all a beauty whose image imprints itself on the mind once and for all. And yet it was impossible to forget her, like a sunset or the blossoming of a cherry tree, and impossible to keep her close, just like the scent of a flower or a fading evening ray. And yet there was something in this face that firmly held him to the ground, that didn't let him disappear carelessly and frivolously, her eyes. Huge, grey-blue. However, he wouldn't vouch for their colour. It was possible that this amazing creature could easily change their colour at will. Well, there it was. Just a moment ago they were grey with a bluish tint, but a few moments later they darkened and became the colour of dark pearls. Probably because their owner frowned in bewilderment. But, apparently, the anxiety was unfounded. Her forehead smoothed, her lips twitched in a slight smile, and now her eyes shone with warm, joyful blue aquamarines. Her eyes were wonderfully expressive. In them was sometimes anxiety, sometimes a sly grin, sometimes a quiet, calm sadness. They laughed and cried, rejoiced and grieved, joked and questioned. And for all this, their owner did not need to open her mouth and utter words, shed tears, frown or smile, like other people. He tore himself away from her face with difficulty and stared at the tip of a thin finger with a short oval nail. "Do you hear me? Hello?" She leaned over his face and looked intently into his eyes. This made him catch his breath and his throat felt scratchy. "Look at me. Like this. Good. And now again. Look to the right. Now to the left. Good." "Well, seems okay." She mumbled something in her elvish human. "Pupils are calm, temperature is normal, no nausea, eye movement is painless. Let's assume you got off with a slight scare." "Yes," he nodded joyfully. Not understanding a word, he would have agreed to anything now, just for her to stay by his side as long as possible. It suddenly became completely unimportant to him where he was, what was happening to him, even who he himself was, and why he couldn't remember it. If all this was the price for meeting those incredible eyes, that elusive light smile, those slightly anxious, pale, thin lips, those hands smelling of green leaves, lemon juice, and rain, well, he was happy to agree to such a price. And then the fairy surprised him. With strong, deft, not at all ethereal hands, she unexpectedly lifted him by the shoulders and tucked a pillow under them. "Well, now you need to eat," she said. After these words, so simple and earthly, he finally came to his senses. Until this second, he had been as if in a trance, in some enchanted state, helplessly observing the amazing phenomena that shifted before him. And now the hypnosis was over, and immediately his head, ribs, leg, and for some reason his bandaged fingers on his right hand ached, throbbed, and twitched, and his stomach rumbled too, so loudly that she listened in surprise and nodded understandingly. A few minutes later, he was enjoying, scalding himself, sipping amber chicken broth from a large mug with flecks of fragrant herbs, probably some kind of magical potion. Then there was another light and quick prick in the shoulder. After it, the pain, which had been trying to snatch the mug of broth from him, quickly began to subside. "Well, that's good. Now you need to rest, and then we'll talk," she said, her eyes shining cheerfully. It seemed his appetite, which little could affect, pleased her. She helped him lie down on the bed, and dimming the brittle, bright winter day, drew the curtain. Although it seemed to him that she had done it with some magical movement. "Tell me," He started to raise himself, fighting off the quickly overwhelming sleepy stupor. The gnomes. Were the gnomes really gnomes? She turned around and laughed as if scattering silver bells. Yes, the gnomes were real, she confirmed. Good, he whispered to himself. So everything else was real too. So she really existed too. With this comforting thought, he fell asleep. His third awakening was simpler, much more pleasant than the previous two. He lifted his eyelids without even remembering the fear of pain, and immediately began searching for his fairy with his eyes. He was already mentally calling the striking creature that left an anxious charm by that name. Anxious because he still didn't understand anything, and for some reason didn't want to start understanding. He seemed to be suspended between his past reality and a new, unknown one, and frankly, he didn't want to go back. Perhaps she sensed that he had woken up, and she appeared. Yes, she didn't enter, but appeared, as if woven from air. Good morning. Day, evening, she said, looking intently into his eyes. Excellent sleep. You could even say outstanding. She pulled up a chair and sat down. Well, let's talk, she said, tilting her head. Do you remember anything? Of course, everything, he nodded. You, the broth, the gnomes, all three, red, blue, and yellow, and you. And that's all? She asked again. And that's all, he nodded cautiously. How could he explain to her that for some reason he didn't want to remember anything else, when he had her face, the scent of freshness from her thin hands, and a funny, airy song about a little fir tree? Well, let's start with the simplest, she was relentless. What's your name? My name? He was surprised. It turned out he had managed to forget that every person simply had to have a name. My name is... Something was on the tip of my tongue, and it vanished. I don't remember. He shrugged guiltily. I don't know. Well, isn't that a problem? And I don't know either, she sighed. You see, you had nothing on you. No documents, no phone, no card. Just nothing that could help understand who you are, where you came from. Maybe you remember a name, an address, a phone number, anything at all. No. Apparently you have amnesia. Temporary, we hope. Don't be scared. She looked at him doubtfully, obviously seeing no hint of fear on his face. It happens, and quite often, with head injuries, concussions. You need to rest properly and try to remember yourself. How did I end up here, at your place? He asked, although he really wanted to say, with you. Listen, she smiled, it's a bit awkward that we're using you, like in an interview. Let's switch to you, informal, okay? Hey, what's wrong? Are you feeling bad? Dizzy? She leaned in anxiously, watching his strained face. Yes, something's happened, or rather, it's about to happen. How awful. How to confess to the magical fairy that he was being tormented by the most earthly, prosaic need? What was he supposed to do now? He looked at her with a shy plea, not knowing how to express his problem. Ah, I see, she nodded calmly. Well, get up, let's go. You're not as unable to walk as you might think. By the way, all the more reason for us to switch to you quickly. Such matters are easier to handle between good friends, aren't they? He didn't even notice how, to the sound of her silver voice, he found himself awkwardly standing on his feet, tucking his tightly bandaged limb under him. Just a bad sprain, she explained, following his gaze. She slipped under his arm with a quick, flexible movement. So they hobbled to a place which, to his surprise, existed not only in the homes of mere mortals, but also in the dwellings of fairies. There he looked at his reflection and recoiled in fright. A gaunt man with cloudy, sleepy eyes stared back at him from a mirror cracked in the corner. An abrasion on his forehead was slightly covered by tangled hair, and his face was covered with a considerable 3-day stubble. "Aha, looking good," his hostess nodded cheerfully. "But I must admit, it suits you somehow. We even gave you a nickname, the Noble Night Robber. The boys think you fought bravely but couldn't stand against 100,000 enemies. Oh well, you'll get stronger in a bit. I'll give you a razor and a comb, and you'll be clean-shaven, decent, and boring again." He really wanted to ask who "we" were, what boys she was talking about, and why being clean-shaven was boring, but he didn't dare. "Well," she said when he had settled back onto the bed. "So you don't remember anything? Well, then I'll tell you what I know. Maybe some memories will surface. Something will suddenly come to mind. Okay. By the way, my name is Victoria, Vicky. This is my apartment, so you can stay here as long as you need, completely at ease." So, the fairy tale fairy, the enchanted creature, had turned into a quite real young woman named Victoria. But his involuntary inner tremor at the sound of her voice, the scent of her hands and hair, the sight of her eyes, that hadn't gone away. On the contrary, it only grew stronger with joy at the thought that all this belonged to someone who wouldn't disappear or deceive him. Half an hour later, he was thoughtfully fiddling with the edge of a fluffy blanket, going over everything he had heard from Victoria in his head. She had found him on the street, not far from her house, late in the evening, lying in a snowdrift, in just a shirt and jeans, beaten, unconscious. Asking a passerby for help, she had dragged him to the emergency room. They were asked to leave. He had no documents. And yet, at her requests, demands, pleas, and threats, he was brought to consciousness. His head and leg were bandaged, and his fingers were wrapped. "To the clinic? I don't have one. Sorry." "So I brought you to my place, put you to bed. Well, and then you know," she finished simply. "But don't worry. I'm not a doctor, but at least I can provide you with first aid and proper care. After all, I have 5 years of medical school behind me." She sighed lightly, lost in thought about something. But then, as if catching herself, she smiled easily and brightly. "You'll rest for a couple of days. Maybe you'll remember something. And anyway, you need to recover faster, because New Year is in a week." Something stirred, turned slightly, moved in his head, but then subsided again. "Understood. So you live here alone?" he asked cautiously, still unaccustomed to using the informal "you," posing a question that was very important to him. What if everything collapsed now? What if his fairy had a rightful fairy? Maybe he was just away on a business trip or out for a couple of days on errands. "Well, why alone?" she chuckled, and his heart ached with longing. "Completely alone, although, to be honest, sometimes I really dream of solitude, even if only for a short while. You've already seen my company. That's how we live, the 4 of us, with the gnomes." "You live with gnomes?" he asked, stunned. "With 3?" he clarified. For some reason, the funny ambiguity of his question hung in the air, and suddenly Vicky began to shake quietly with laughter. He looked at her in surprise, smiled uncertainly, giggled, clutching his ribs with a crushing pain, wincing and groaning, and then burst out laughing himself. "Aha! That's the kind of Snow White I am, though slightly short-changed by fate," Vicky laughed, finally turning into a charming, earthly woman. "I only have 3 gnomes, not enough for a full set." Calming down, wiping away the tears brought on by laughter, Vicky startled him with an incredible fact that didn't fit her at all. It turned out that the gnomes were, of course, not some fairy tale creatures at all, but children, little ones, twins Georgie and Alex, 5 years old, and Victor, who was the same age. And when he first saw them, they were trying on costumes prepared for the New Year's party at kindergarten. That's how his delirium amusingly dissipated. Wait, I don't understand. If Georgie and Alex are twins, and Victor is their age, they should be triplets, shouldn't they? He tried to understand why the news that Victoria had 3 children didn't shock him at all. Perhaps because everything about her had to be unusual, not like other women. Even if she was earthly and had a wonderful but quite ordinary name and had even studied at an institute once, like mere mortals. Still, she was a miracle, extraordinary and incredible. She had 3 little ones. Well, that was also a miracle, just a different one. Well, why necessarily triplets? Vicky smiled. Not necessarily. There's a riddle for you. Lie there and ponder. Very useful in your condition. Okay, we've done the bandages. You've slurped the soup. I gave you the shot. Now sleep. He hastily intercepted her thin hand, still smelling of that same melody of greenery, coolness, and freshness. He pressed it to his lips and gasped in amazement. The palm, which he thought he was holding tightly with his bandaged fingers, literally dissolved, disappeared, leaving a slight chill and a sweet bitterness on his lips. He moaned with pleasure and, as usual, sank into silence and darkness. One bright, calm day, then another. His leg ached with a stretched tendon, his ribs complained painfully to each other about cruel treatment, and one of his fingers suddenly decided to swell up to the size of a sausage. And yet he had never felt so good. He couldn't explain it. He lived in a small apartment, tried to help Vicky, who was constantly busy, appearing and disappearing, and remembered children's games. The kids were wonderful, healthy, slyly intelligent, and there wasn't a drop of what was usually used to stigmatize children from poor and single-parent families. They were more than adequately provided with everything they needed: love, affection, care, and tenderness. And all this was generously seasoned with songs, fairy tales, pancakes, and games of hide and seek, rosy apples, and spaceships made of chairs. The twins Alex and Georgie were charming blonde rascals, always up to something. They constantly played tricks on everyone by the fact that no one but their mother could tell them apart. Victor, dark-haired, brown-eyed, slightly taller than his brothers, was completely different, having inherited his looks, apparently, from some very distant ancestor. And his character was completely different, serious and calm. Perhaps this was somehow explained by the chilling scar that split the boy's upper lip in 2, making him seem to lisp when he spoke. Vicky called him Bunny. However, as soon as the boy entered the orbit of his brothers, there was no trace left of his thoughtfulness and seriousness, and 3 voices and 6 limbs united for common achievements. And suddenly he began to remember. The second day of their life together was ending. The little ones started their usual cheerful romp on the floor, but after a while, one of the twins slightly detached himself from the tangled ball of arms, legs, and heads. Seized by a sudden creative impulse, he began to sing, "Tony, Tony, let's go dig for potatoes." "Tony, Tony, let's go dig for potatoes." His comrades supported him enthusiastically and immediately. Vicky laughed, and he twitched and lunged forward, but got tangled in the blanket and almost fell off the bed. "Potatoes. Tony, I remember. My name is Potato. I mean Tony. Anthony. I'm Anthony." "Well, hello, Anthony. Nice to meet you." She smiled, and her eyes shining, now bright blue like the sea under the sun, shook his hand. "Well, Anthony," she said his name with pleasure. The first step is taken. Now everything should go faster. And you probably need to go to the police. They're probably looking for you, worried. Although she involuntarily looked at his washed and ironed, but frankly shabby jeans and shirt with a collar worn down to the threads. Yes, I understand. I've become a burden to you. To you. I'm sitting here, eating you out of house and home. You're spending food, medicine, time, energy on me. And yes, I should leave. I understand everything, but I don't want to leave. The words burst out of him unexpectedly and puzzled him no less than Victoria. Well, if you think so, of course you can stay with us for a couple more days, get stronger. Frankly, I'll be happy if you stay for a couple or 3 days. We have runny noses here, as always, all 3 of them together. They won't let us into kindergarten, and I can't sit with them right now. Lots of work, and New Year is just around the corner. It's simply awful. And just my luck, Grandma Zoe, our neighbour from the apartment across the hall, is sick. Usually she helps me in such cases, so if you stay with the kids, you'll really help me out. My God, finally he could be useful to her in some way. He suddenly wanted to fall to his knees, kiss Vicky's hands, and thank her for the honour of helping her. Frankly, he didn't understand at all how she managed everything. Early in the morning, she would run off somewhere. By lunchtime, she would bring a pile of colourful paper, frames, folders, and, humming something under her breath, she would cut and glue with enthusiasm. Then she would easily clatter pots in the kitchen, splash water in the bathroom, gather her mysterious crafts, and run off. In the evening, the apartment would fill with boys, shrieking, banging, dirty sneakers and t-shirts, drawings, smacking sounds, songs, arguments, and sometimes desperate roaring. Finally, everything would quiet down, and Vicky would disappear, like the last ray of sun, sometimes for the whole night. She would appear at home as unnoticed as the first morning light penetrates it. But the clothes, washed who knows when, would be folded in neat piles, savoury soups, porridges, and stews would be fragrant in the pots, everything would be in its place, and the boys would magically become clean and combed. How did she manage it? A mystery. Perhaps it was one of her magical secrets. Victoria reluctantly told him about her life, or rather, she said nothing at all, just smiling. So there was no doubt about the pointlessness of these stories. Why talk about the past? Couldn't he see that here and now she was absolutely serenely happy? That she was completely content with life, enjoying every day of it, and only dreamed that, God forbid, nothing would change. Only much of what surrounded her somehow didn't fit the concept of absolute happiness. However, could he judge what this amazing woman truly needed? Maybe she really was happy. Her frozen fingers, her lack of a winter-down jacket, and the sole of her boot that was about to fall off, which she was gluing, thinking no one saw. These were certainly no reason to refuse a cheerful walk with the boys. And what did things like the pale, darkened wallpaper in the corners matter? Or the old refrigerator shaking in its last convulsions, and the fact that only one burner on the stove worked properly? So what? Did all this prevent the unrestrained fun that reigned in the house, or make the dishes any less tasty? No, quite the opposite. It was so fun and great to draw together on the faded wallpaper, and no one else had such pictures on their walls. And perhaps it didn't matter at all, that light, but noticeable shadows had forever settled under her amazing eyes, and her small collarbones stretched the thin, light skin so tautly that it constantly looked as if it would tear at any moment. Well, maybe they were supposed to be like that, translucent, weightless. But really, where have you seen a fairy with rosy cheeks and extra weight? Realizing that he wouldn't get anything out of Vicky anyway, Anthony looked more closely at everything around her and at the people living nearby. The house was small, 2-story, with a single entrance, very old, with a wide, creaky staircase. There were 4 apartments, and everyone knew everything about everyone else and a little more besides. The house was sick, celebrated, grieved, was indignant and rejoiced. In short, it lived. And Victoria was its small, brave heart. Anthony was convinced of this very soon. Holding on to the railing, the man was already quite skillfully hopping on his 1.5 legs, accompanying the gang of boys outside. "There they are!" shouted the neighbour from the ground floor, Irene, whom everyone called Auntie, behind her back, almost trampling them. She was known for her quarrelsome, distrustful nature, habitually in irreconcilable confrontation with one of the neighbours. Of course, she was extremely unhappy with the bunch of constantly chattering boys. The boys left chains of footprints on the clean hallway floor, as well as balls, candy wrappers, stray cats, mittens, shovels, and God knows what else from the senseless arsenal of little ones. "Excuse me, I forgot to give instructions before going out," Anthony laughed, hobbling up to the woman standing in the pose of an avenging fury. "You could hammer nails into their heads," she grumbled. "They're blockheads, one and all. What one, what the other, what the third." "Oh, don't say that. Why say that?" Anthony shook his head. "They are wonderful kids, and so friendly. It's strange that only Victor is not at all like Vicky or his brothers. Not a bit. And for some reason, he says he was born on June 10th, and the boys on the 25th. Well, he's not Vicky's, and he's no brother to the twins," the neighbour replied. "That is, he's not related to them. That soft-hearted fool took him from the maternity hospital along with hers. 2, of course, wouldn't be enough, but 3 is just right. He's a foundling." She looked angrily at Anthony's puzzled face. "You don't understand?" "Well, he was abandoned at the maternity hospital. His own mother abandoned him. Look how he was born, a monster with a hare lip. And everyone wants perfect babies, like angels, as if they're going to live in paradise later." The woman smiled bitterly and maliciously. "Well, and so she dragged 3 home, like a cat, honestly. Sometimes she has nothing to feed her own, and she's put a stranger around her neck." Years of bitterness that had permeated Irene were now clearly struggling with something bright and pure. And suddenly, kindness won. The woman smiled, and her usual mask of grimness and suspicion seemed to fall from her face. Although, of course, Vicky saved Victor. Where would he go like that? No one else would have taken him, straight to the orphanage and then to the children's home. And there, can you imagine what would have happened to him? Like that there. They would have ruined the boy, that's all. And suddenly, as if remembering herself, she grimaced. Her life will begin with this. Well, not life, but hard labour. Now she's working her fingers to the bone at 3 jobs, soon there'll be nothing left of her. And all of us women are fools. That's how we live, for whom, we don't know, giving ourselves completely, and then we're left with nothing. You toil like a camel without rest, then you stand in the kitchen, then you sleep almost standing up like a war horse. She looked at Anthony, who had already started descending towards the exit of the entrance. "No time to think about yourself. Go to the hairdresser, get a massage. Just live one day in your life only for yourself, like a real woman. I'm a woman too, by the way. And tell Vicky, if she really is going to decorate the tree in the yard, let her clean up the trash herself afterwards." Irene's shouts were heard even after the entrance door closed behind him. "Ah, so that's who Grandma Zoe is these days." Anthony heard another woman's voice behind him, but a completely different one. Quiet, calm, slightly shaky. Just in case, he counted the boys scrambling in the snowdrift with his eyes and turned around. Behind him stood a short, slightly hunched old woman in a funny fur hat. "You're Anthony. Vicky told me about you." She smiled with an incredibly warm, kind smile, the kind only grandmothers who make no distinction between their own and others' grandchildren can give. "She found you, did she? And now she's nursing you back to health?" Not surprising, that's how she is, always has been. She rushes to help everyone. It doesn't matter who is in front of her, a child, a sparrow, a man, a kitten, an old woman. "Just don't tell Vicky you saw me outside," she asked, smiling. "She'll scold me for going out. She came running to me on her way to work this morning, took my blood pressure, brought me pills, ordered me to lie down and not get up. But I dragged myself out. I really need to go to the post office, send gifts to my grandchildren. My grandchildren are far away. My son Serge works there. I just can't wait to see my Serge and the girls. I just don't have the strength." She sighed and dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "No, I don't blame Serge," she justified her son, unknown to Anthony. "Where would he find the time? It's flying halfway across the country. They are busy people, both him and his wife. They don't forget me, don't you think? They call me often. They worry too. They always promise, 'We'll come. We'll definitely come.' But when? No, I understand everything. I'm just very afraid, because I might die any day now and not see them." She again dabbed her eyes with the handkerchief, raised her bright, clear eyes to Anthony, the kind only children and old people have, and smiled shyly. "Oh, Anthony, forgive me. I've completely talked your ear off." She laughed a small, quiet laugh. "You just reminded me of my Sarge. Well, it was nice to meet you. Just remember." As she said goodbye, she walked away, carefully clutching a package, evidently with gifts for her granddaughters. And he, who hadn't said a word to her, watched her go for a long time, feeling an unfamiliar sadness for someone else's separation. The boys, having had their fill of playing, tumbled into the entrance in a noisy crowd, covered from head to toe in soft snowballs. Anthony, unable to keep up with them, hobbled behind. A leather glove lay on the landing of the first floor. "He drops them all the time," one of the boys announced authoritatively from above. "He lives in the second apartment." Anthony rang the doorbell, and a few seconds later, a thin woman with a tired face and dull eyes opened the door. "Ah, Vlad?" Anthony stammered, fiddling with the glove in his hand. The woman waved towards a room. A man was sitting on an old sofa. Broad-shouldered, with regular features, black wavy hair. Even as 100% man who preferred to admire female beauty, Anthony had to admit the man sitting before him was very handsome. He was out of place and out of time here, among the faded wallpaper, old furniture, and dusty, stale air. He should have been shining with intelligent eyes on a movie screen, been a physical education coach. But the man couldn't do any of that, not stand, not run, not jump, nothing. Because his legs, helpless, unnaturally thin and lifelessly still, weighing nothing, chained him to the cracked, long unpainted floor more securely than multi-ton shackles. He raised his head and smiled. "Again?" he said. "No, really, I'll ask Mom to sew on an elastic band." "I walk, but in a figurative sense. That is, I used to ride, in a wheelchair," Anthony asked cautiously. "It's called a wheelchair," the man said without self-pity and with a habitual, long-standing, therefore calm pain. Even without a leg, I still enjoy privileges. I can sit in my chair even in the presence of the head of the country. No matter how bitter he felt, he couldn't help but smile and laugh. Vicky came up with that for me, you know. It helps. And anyway, if it weren't for her, I might have, well, never mind. And I do have a chair, yes, there it is. Vladimir waved towards a pile of metal on wheels. My old one, it's been repaired 10 times, and it's no use, it keeps breaking, and a new one is very expensive, and you have to wait for a free one. So I sit and wait like a miracle from Father Frost. The words of the handsome young man, sitting helplessly trapped within 4 walls, carried such hopelessness that Anthony lowered his eyes. And when he raised them again, he blinked in surprise. A painting hung on the wall. At first, Anthony took it for a painted city landscape. A narrow street between old houses, a wet pavement reflecting the yellowish light of streetlights, and a lonely, thin human figure. And suddenly, Anthony straightened up and looked more closely. The painting seemed to come alive, to stir. He even thought the little figure took a small step forward. Was he having hallucinations again? He glanced back at Vlad in panic. He nodded and smiled. Anthony stepped closer and gasped. The painting was 3-dimensional. The houses seemed to protrude from the frame like real ones, and it seemed that soon lights would come on in the windows, a tram would turn the corner. Look, the rails gleamed between the houses, and the figure would jump in place and hurry about its business. Scientifically, it's called paper toll, a technique for creating 3-dimensional paintings, Vladimir explained to the amazed Anthony. And simply put, it's called Vicky's Little Miracle. This is her painting. She gave it to me a long time ago. I just look at this street, and sometimes it seems to me that I myself am walking along it, breathing the air after the rain, afraid of getting hit by a tram. My God, what happiness it is to be afraid of getting hit by a tram. Ah, never mind, he decided to change the subject. How is that? You've been staying at her place for several days and haven't seen any of her paintings? Although, yes, she doesn't keep them at home, as she once said. She's afraid of falling into self-admiration. How can she have nothing left? She just makes them and sells them right away. She needs money for the boys, for all her charity, and she also works shifts at the hospital, washes dishes in a restaurant, and I just sit. Vlad pulled the pathetic remains of his legs towards him and smiled. Can you imagine, she told me once, Vlad, I've calculated that to buy you a new chair, I only need to make 86 paintings. I've already made 10, just a trifle left. Isn't she a fool? A few hours earlier, Anthony had heard Vicky called a fool. But then the shrill female voice had boiled with misunderstanding, disbelief, and bitterness, so the word had come out venomous, sticky. Now the crippled young man said it softly, gently, carefully, and it sounded like a tender, touching, shy confession. Are you leaving soon? Brown-eyed Victor looked at Anthony seriously, intently. Tired of me, huh? The man nodded playfully at the boy. I'm getting in your way here. Yesterday I accidentally ate Georgie's apple. No, it's just, you see, I really love them apples. Since childhood, I've always eaten several, even with the core. Anthony froze. Something inside his head powerfully lunged, jumped, like a fish thrown onto the shore, trying to return to where everything is familiar and understandable, but, losing strength, it quieted down again. That wasn't Georgie's apple, it was mine. Actually, he ate his right away. What does that matter? He heard Victor's voice and looked at the boy bunny in confusion. I'll give you all of mine, the twins will give you theirs too. Just don't leave us, at least until New Year. Why? Anthony was amazed. I'm no use at all. Mum just doesn't cry anymore, Victor explained patiently and frighteningly because of the seriousness in his eyes. Well, since you came to us, she hasn't cried once. She thinks I don't see, and no one sees, but I see. And no one should cry on New Year's. Everyone should be happy, like us, like me. Victor said the last words confidently. The little one, born to be disadvantaged, proudly raised his head, boasting about something he couldn't possibly have by definition, happiness. Vicky, Anthony looked at her. That smell, so fresh. What is that smell? She asked in surprise. Oh, it's verbena. Always loved it. And it repels the boys like mosquitoes. If you use a little too much, they start sneezing and leave me alone. Anthony, what's wrong? He swayed, closed his eyes and clutched his head. It started buzzing. Verbena! Of course! The freshness of wet leaves and citrus, that's the smell of verbena. Mom, this is my gift, Sonny. These are my favourites. Anthony, we're breaking the contract. Deal with this immediately and personally. You're something else, Smith. 18,000 euros for a week's vacation. Only you could do that. And there will be reports. That's what's expensive. I need to change my car. Or rather, you need to change my car. Tony, stop eating apples with cores and stems. What is this really? You'll have stomach problems. USA? That restaurant? You'll buy it out? Oh, how about the one where we had such a blast with those, well, you know. Mr. Anthony Smith, one call from you, and the delivery is ours. Oh, Tony, you finally got those watches with diamonds. How much did you pay? How much? 500,000? Well, it's okay, basically. How can you live in this apartment? The split system here is useless. Smith, do you remember? The day after tomorrow we're all flying to the Champions League final, 5 boxes booked. Phrases, whole and fragmented, voices, engine noise, crowd shouts, computer whispers, racing car roar, mobile phone melody, clinking of silverware, airport announcements. All this crashed down on Anthony like a mountain avalanche. Memories rushed through his head chaotically, aimlessly, as if trying to quickly find and occupy their places, lost a few days ago. I remember, he gasped. I remember. I'm Anthony Smith. I'm 34 years old. I live in the centre. I'm so happy for you. Her eyes shone. So happy. It's so great to remember yourself. It's like you gave yourself to yourself for New Year. She laughed. So you have somewhere and someone to go back to? He nodded. Wonderful. A light shadow fell on her face and disappeared faster than he could blink. Just wonderful. Well, happy trails. We'll miss you. And please don't forget anything anymore. She touched his cheek more with a sigh, a scent, a warmth, than with her lips, and disappeared, as dreams should. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth. That was him, Anthony Smith. The boy, the only son of a very wealthy businessman, grew up, of course, in complete comfort, provided with everything imaginable, especially after losing his mother early. Anthony received an excellent education, polished to a blinding shine, and the position of future heir to a large firm. And along with that, he received a destiny, pre-planned down to the smallest detail, from which it was almost impossible to escape. However, the path was comfortable, luxurious, and the constant envy of others. When Anthony turned 30, his father completely handed over the affairs of the large company to him. And along with that, the duties of the soul of the company of a group of wealthy young businessmen, convinced that everything is for sale and purchase, the only question is the price, passed to him. They bought and sold cars, companies, honour, clothes, foreign resorts, women, health, conscience, restaurants. Only Anthony suddenly began to notice that over the years the price became higher and higher, and what was bought became worse and worse. Life began to offer outright rubbish, from which his head ached with longing, and his heart grew indifferently cold. And then, at the very end of the year, there was a half-joking bet. When was the last time you worked so that you weren't just tapping on a laptop, yelling into a phone, or bossing secretaries around, but really with your hands? What can you even do? Take away your credit cards, your supercars, and you'll starve to death in a week, one of them started. I still remember your screams on the plane that people with illnesses should fly on separate flights. When was that? And anyway, that's not what we're talking about. I can easily live without money. Want to bet? Anthony held out his hand. Bet! His friend exclaimed. My driver's parents are just moving out of an old communal apartment. There's a place for you to live. Just remember, you give up everything. Your watch, your ring, your sneakers worth 100,000, all your credit cards, phones, and we'll monitor your accounts. And you won't pull out my porcelain teeth, Anthony grumbled. That would be good, his friend laughed. Okay, you've convinced me. Until Christmas, on our Christmas trip. Deal? They shook hands in front of a large crowd of cheerful witnesses. That's how Anthony Smith found himself on the outskirts, more like a slum than a city district, in an old half-empty apartment with leaky pipes. For 2 days he honestly held out, so to speak, on his subcutaneous fat, and then, to get food, he almost got into a fight with stray dogs he met. He managed to get hired to unload a huge truck full of groceries. After dragging away another box, he slipped on a banana peel thrown away by someone's shoe. He felt quick, rough fingers searching his pockets and pulling the not-so-great jacket from his shoulders. And then there was cold, darkness, and silence, pain and fear. The smell of verbena, the song about the little fir tree that is cold in winter, and an adventure the length of a small life. Gnomes and a handsome disabled man, a poor little apartment, a masterpiece of paper on the wall, a lonely old woman, and the most delicious chicken broth in the world. But most importantly, huge shining eyes, a silver voice, and thin, strong hands with protruding bones. All this cannot be bought with money, or can it? He arrived at the familiar house and immediately saw Vicky. She was decorating a large, fluffy fir tree standing in the middle of the yard. "Anthony!" she exclaimed, her gaze sweeping over the huge black SUV, the perfectly fitting coat on the man, his shiny shoes, and she smiled. "I see you really had something to remember." "Yes, well," he said, not knowing what to do with his hands, his eyes, or himself at all, from the acute feeling that he was completely out of place here. How could this be? It had been so good just recently. They smiled at him. They loved him. Poor, sick, remembering nothing, he was one of them here, and he was happy. And now? What now? Vicky seemed to guess his thoughts and asked, "And what next?" "I wanted to thank you." He pulled a plastic card from his pocket. "What is this?" she asked with her eyes. He had never seen that look in her eyes before. And he had thought he had already studied all the shades of her eyes. Now they were grey steel, and he mumbled, "Vicky, well, this is money. For you, for the boys, for repairs maybe, clothes. No, don't think, there's a lot, really a lot. You need money, I know you need it." "I do," she nodded, and the silver notes disappeared from her voice too. "But not this kind, and not from you." "Well, Vicky, let's not. And you did spend on me. I ate and drank at your place for almost a week. What else?" "Is this for help?" she repeated thoughtfully. Well, thank you, of course, but I don't take money for help, or for friendship, or for... In short, I don't need anything from you." She shook her head and added with a smile, "Imagine, we thought you were a noble robber, but you're just a rich shopkeeper." "We were wrong. I was wrong. Again, it's a pity." He sat in negotiations, observing the people detachedly. Opening? Just help? He loved her. Can you hurt someone you love? Or can you? What had he done? Of course, he had hurt her, insulted her, because feelings, real feelings, cannot be bought. They can only be received as a gift. How simple. Why did he forget this so quickly? How did he forget the disabled man trapped by walls, old Zoe, and the thin hands smelling of his mother's perfume? "Idiot! Cretin! Moneybag!" Anthony suddenly exclaimed. "You know Mr. Anthony Smith," the astonished interlocutor said, rising slightly. "Perhaps our terms are not the most suitable for you, but I would still ask you—" "Oh, I'm sorry," Anthony laughed. "I wasn't talking about you. I was talking about myself. I'm leaving now. My deputy will sign everything. And I don't have time. Forgive me. I have to run. I have so much to do. After all, tomorrow is New Year. It's time for dreams to come true." On December 31st, he patiently watched Vicky and her old neighbour untangling garlands with 4 hands. "Oh, wait, Anthony, what are you doing? You're getting in my way. Oh dear, I broke a bulb on the garland because of you, and we're all meeting at the tree tonight. Grandma Zoe, don't dress the boys too warmly, okay? It's warm outside." "Grandma Zoe won't be able to come to the tree. A car will be here for her in an hour," Anthony suddenly said. "What?" the women asked in unison, looking at him in surprise. "Yes, yes. Get ready, Grandma Zoe. They'll come for you, take you to the airport, and you'll fly to your son and his family to celebrate New Year. Your granddaughters are really waiting for you, making you gifts. I called your son. He even dropped his phone in joy." "He'll meet you." "But how?" The old woman was flustered. "Anthony, I won't make it. I'll die." "You won't die." Anthony nodded resolutely. "It's a private plane. There will be a doctor with you at all times with the necessary equipment to help you if needed." "I'm flying." The old woman nodded decisively and even stamped her foot. "No, I can't," Anthony thought. "He hasn't earned this yet. I need to visit your neighbour from the first floor too." Vlad. Anthony, limping, entered the apartment, pushing before him a light but stable wheelchair that looked more like a modern, stylish mini-car for one. "This, of course, won't replace your legs, but you know it's an amazing thing, manoeuvrable, light. To be honest, I rode in it for half a day myself. Everything is adjustable, arm rests, foot rests, backrest, headrest. Vlad, honestly, it's more comfortable than in an expensive foreign car, and the main thing is the electric drive. 50 kilometers without recharging. I don't envy whoever goes for a walk with you. You'll wear anyone out now, and the wheels can handle anything, asphalt, snow, even go into the desert." "Vlad, oh, come on, it's just a chair. Walk, Vlad, walk as much as you want." Anthony felt his hand squeezed by surprisingly strong, warm, and honest fingers. "Well, are you getting used to the new machine?" He nodded to Vlad's mother, who was bewildered, disbelieving, not knowing whether to cry or laugh, but who had already somewhere dropped her hopelessness and despondency. She looked at her son and openly admired him. "We're waiting for everyone at Vicky's tree tonight. New Year is coming soon." They finally gathered in the yard, by the tree shining with garlands, under a light snowfall. The boys, who were reluctantly torn away from a mountain of presents, Vlad, incredibly handsome, looking confidently ahead, evidently into the distances he would roll in his new chair, his mother, rejuvenated by 20 years. Victoria. He had no one to compare her to, his beloved, and he didn't need to. Oh, look who showed up, not a speck of dust on him. Irene's inimitable creaky voice rang out. Well, imagine that. So our foundling turned into a prince. Who would have thought? Ah, I didn't know, or I would have nursed you myself. She headed towards the entrance, throwing over her shoulder, Vicky, tomorrow morning make sure all the cracker papers are picked up. Get the prints out for the clean-up too. Don't forget. Irene, wait. Anthony caught himself, catching up with the neighbour. Wait, Irene, this is for you. He handed the woman a rectangular envelope. What is this? She stared at Anthony suspiciously. This is a certificate for a full day at a beauty salon. Massage, manicure, hairdresser, masks, what else? Lots of things, whatever you want. But remember, you said a whole day just for yourself, like a real woman. Well, here. Happy New Year. Irene looked at Anthony and Vicky, at the envelope with her beautiful feminine desires, at the tree lit up with lights, and it was unclear what was shining on her cheeks. Perhaps snowflakes falling on them and melting from the warmth. Well, and what did Father Frost give you? Vicky smiled. Nothing yet. He shook his head sadly. He doesn't need anything except what one young woman has. She just won't give it to me. Either she doesn't want to, or she can't. She can, her silver voice whispered. She can, and she wants to very much. She's just shy. It's all yours, and only for you. Take it, own it, play and rejoice. Just don't leave it for too long. Vicky and Anthony sat side by side, pressed close together, in the yard, on a bench near the tree. There was complete silence around them, and it seemed to them that there was no one else in the world but the two of them. However, all lovers feel exactly that way. Quiet, light snow was falling from the sky, sifting down in delicate, weightless snowflakes. The tree, sparkling with lights, swayed a fluffy paw, and it seemed to Anthony at the same time that a tall old man with a white beard would peek out from behind it. He would shake his staff at them and ask sternly, "And who is this giving out presents left and right instead of me?" The snow fell quietly, making the world whiter, cleaner, and kinder. More worthy of the new year. Undoubtedly, a happy and bright one. "And I've figured out your secret," Anthony's whisper came. "Purr," Vicky murmured, pressing against his side. "It's very simple. If you want to be happy yourself, make someone else happy." And somewhere far away, as if agreeing with him, the New Year's chimes struck softly, resonantly, and joyfully,